welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. We are today back with the Ask George episodes that we do. These are a blast. This is core, original, shared practices. Me and George. I learn. We think of new analogies. We think of new frameworks every time we record one of these episodes, and I'm just grateful for this time. This is just fun, George. This
Yeah,
is great.
and I think we recorded our last time we recorded Ask George episodes. You and I were kind of chatting afterwards, and you talked about how after all these years, after hundreds, maybe we're up to close to 1,000 hours of content on the Shared Practices podcast in our lifetimes, we still continue to find new ways to talk about things. And I think that that's just been the gift that keeps giving. And so, I'm excited to kind of go forward with another one. And I may just tell a little bit of an anecdote for the inspiration for this episode. So I was speaking with just one of our dentist clients who works with one of the coaches at Shared Practices Coaching, and this individual has a practice. Practice is doing very well, and this individual has a large compulsion to make money in the practice and then invest that on just all kinds of things on the side, so like real estate or the stocks or just like any, and it's almost like there's this angst to how this particular dentist receives the income and then will go invest it in anything. And kind of when I was chatting with this individual, a comment that he made was something around the lines of, I don't let money sit there. And so the reason why I want to have this conversation and have this episode is because of the impact that this tendency was having on this dentist. This dentist was working clinically more than he wanted to and was feeling like he had a pressure to have a certain income to fuel not only his lifestyle, but also his investments. And it was turning to the point where the dentist was feeling like this was becoming potentially unsustainable, where the burnout approach of, working clinically more than maybe he wanted to was, kind of becoming really challenging. And that was where, didn't want more practice growth, burnt out, wondering how many years he can continue to own the practice. And I had a conversation with this individual, and I want to have it to be the episode today where we can talk to anybody who might be feeling this way. Because, what I explained to him is that your practice asset is the biggest financial wealth creation vehicle that you have. And trying to create wealth on secondary or tertiary opportunities that make the primary opportunity unsustainable was a little bit of a reverse order of operations. And so I want to just have an episode where we just talk about how, from a retirement perspective, from long-term wealth planning, I think there's a lot of dentists, and I'll speak to them now. I'm not talking about this individual, I'm talking in general about, I think there's a lot of dentists that get to the point where they achieve our mega group avatar that we talk about. You have 2 or 3 dentists, you're doing $2 to $3 million a year in collections each year. And eventually you get burnt out from that and you sell it to a DSO, or you, decide that you want something different. And I think for me, the thing that I really want to impart in this episode is I want people to understand the wealth effects and the long-term financial value that you could get by holding that asset. And so that's like the subject that I really want us to talk about today. And that conversation I was alluding to earlier was sort of my inspiration.
Yeah, I think a really dangerous headspace to be in is, I'm doing something I hate doing, it's unsustainable, and I just need to sprint to the finish and the financial finish. If I can just get to this point, then I'll be happy. I'll have this set up, these circumstances. And you're deferring making hard decisions about living a life that you want to live right now. And there's assumptions that that's not possible. I can't have a profitable, sustainable asset and make progress financially in a way that is sustainable. And so I just need to do something crazy unsustainable and walk away and get out. And there's some sort of like panicky freedom on the other side of this. And uh, I've just learned I'm not building businesses or assets that like I have to sprint to get out of. that is like a core tenet for the rest of my life. It's like, can I build something that is sustainable and fulfilling? And a dental practice is such a powerful, you talk about the practice 01k, ability to create cash flow, freedom, and wealth, net worth. It's this incredible triangle that I was just thinking about this the other day. If you want to be really crazy rich, dentistry is kind of not the place to go. If you're like a true hardcore entrepreneur, like there's some hard caps to the scalability of dentistry compared to other things. But if you want to be really pretty comfortable and well off and have the ability to create income, freedom, and net worth that is far in excess of what family, friends, the average American that can provide for an amazing lifestyle, your practice is the asset. It's the vehicle that don't make assumptions around that this is a sprint. Like, can we turn this into something that you just have options? Whenever you can say, I could sell this and make a bunch of money, it'd be great. Right now, I could walk away. I can go somewhere else and do it again in another state, another circumstance. I can hold on to this indefinitely. And it just kicks off profit and is a business that's not killing me. And I think that's what you're speaking to in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, we should probably dive into that, right? Because I think there's, just, I like to speak in fundamentals. And so I think fundamentally speaking, let's just say you're in your mid to late 30s, for example, and you've built up, a nice, like, $2.5-3 million a year practice. Well, you might be tempted by the idea of selling that practice, for maybe a total value of $3 million. And the point that I really want us to like really over explain in this episode is, it could be worth $3 million today, and it could probably be worth $3 million 20 years from now or more if you grow it, right? And so I think that the real value that I want to communicate is the difference between selling it today for $3 million versus cash flowing it for 20 years and then selling it for $3 million.
Yeah.
Because that cash flow, like, think about it, right? You are always going to have a house. You're always going to have bills. You're always going to have needs for cash flow month in, month out. And your practice is like the perfect vehicle to just replenish your checking account each and every month so that you can spend your living expenses. You can maybe save a modest amount of money. And like, I think that in my time, I think I had a comment once. I was talking to another dentist, and he told me that he's been listening to me since I was a dental student, when Richard and I first started recording, all the way until today. And he talked about how my perspective has changed to be so much more conservative through the years, and he's kind of noticed that shift. And I do think, in a way, time has worn on me and has changed some of my views. And I think one of the things that time has done for me is that it really has helped me appreciate the value of recurring cash flow. I don't think I maybe was as appreciative of the value of just recurring cash flow that comes in month after month after month. And, for dentists, a lot of us have the dentist lifestyle, right? So there's like, you inflate your lifestyle once you become, once you have a certain degree of financial success. And the ability to have an asset that you own that continues to pay that lifestyle comfortably each and every month is extremely valuable. And I think that at times you can think, oh, well, the big check of money, the $3 million for my practice, is much more than the maybe $500,000 a year that you get each and every year from the practice. But, as we've kind of come to realize, that cash flow is really nice. And so I think that, that's the first thing I really want people to kind of appreciate. And there's a really big difference between a sustainable source of cash flow and a source of cash flow that burns you out, right? And I think that that's the thing that is required of you as the owner of the business to make to be able to wait the type of timeline that I think would be in your best financial interest. You also have to put the practice in a position where it's not a drain on your happiness day in and day out, and it's something that is a sustainable asset that you can own and continue to cash flow long term.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about this in terms of what is the version of your practice that you could truly not produce dentistry in? Like, if you look at the true profit of your practice, could you kick off $100,000, $150,000 off of a practice without doing an inch of dentistry, like a couple months of meetings with a really good office manager, and maybe even significantly more. But like, I remember I listened to a lot of the Bigger Pockets podcast back in the day, and they talked about for single family rentals, like a house, if you're making $200 to $300 cash flow per door per home you
Yeah.
own, you're doing really good. You're paying, you are paying down the mortgage, you're paying down the loan. But think about that. That means you need, 5 properties gets you $1,000. 50 properties gets you $100,000. And well, I guess
The 120,000. Yeah.
yeah, but that, I mean, I'm thinking about that's actually per month. So like
Yeah.
it's somewhere
So
in the
50
range. Don't do
properties
math.
gives you 120,000 per year.
There we go.
Yeah.
So can you imagine buying and managing 50 single family rentals? Like, you've got a whole business, a whole team, and when you get that big, you actually might make less per door because you now have a bigger team. You've got to take like less good properties because you're trying to scale. Like, it is insane what kind of a passive vehicle a
Yeah.
dental
Quote
practice
unquote
can be,
passive.
quote unquote.
Yeah.
And but what I'm saying is, open your mind to that possibility of truly turning this into a business you don't practice in. If you could do that well, um, that's like what an insane asset this is. So I don't know. For me,
So,
just comparing it to real estate like that makes it a really interesting comparison. And that's, you might own a practice that kicks off way more EBITDA per year, and you're not practicing in it.
yeah. So I would like to just kind of do maybe rough numbers. So, so let's just say we have a $2.5 million practice, which I think is a good amount to look at if you have, for example, like associate led, right? If it's associate led,
How many doctors? Two and a
two
half or
doctors,
two
two
doctors?
doctors, 2.5 million, got a good hygiene pool. You're looking at 450K per year of at like a modest margin, modest to good. You're looking at around $450,000 per year of profit to the owner. Let's just say you bought the practice. Like if you did our standard ready to grow, you might owe the bank 120,000 per year. So then, you're looking at somewhere like 330K per year in cash flow owning that practice, right? And
Without you picking up the handpiece.
exactly. And that, on one side is great, right? But then imagine, like, let's just say maybe your practice is 1.8, maybe it's a little smaller, and that number's 200,000, for example, that you get after paying the bank in cash flow. If you were to own, rental properties, in Richard's example, you'd be looking at like 80 rental properties is what that would be. Now imagine how much work would it take you to manage 80 rental properties? Let's just say it's like 1 day a week of work, right? If you were to spend that 1 day a week in the dental office and you were to say, all right, I want to put down the handpiece. I don't want to be a bread and butter, like hygiene check, driven clinician. But I still, for me, like I've been non-clinical for 5 years coming up, and I miss implants. I don't know why. Like I sit there sometimes and I think about like a guided surgery on number 30, how much fun that would be to just like put the guide in, lay the flap, put the implant in. Like it's so easy and it's fun. And like I think about my favorite cases where I had this patient come in. It was a Saturday morning. I went into the office. I spent 90 minutes. I took out all of her maxillary teeth, put 4 implants, and like I had this guide. I really liked guided surgery. I just really enjoyed it. I thought you do all the planning in advance. You show up, you like act like a hero, but it's like kind of, it's made for you in some ways. And like 5 years later, I'm still thinking about it, And I think that for me, like if you could find the best of both worlds, I would say the best of both worlds is find the very small niche of dentistry that you really do enjoy doing. You think is, it's productive, it's profitable, it also helps people, and you enjoy the process of doing it. And for me, like that would be my sort of like push for somebody who's thinking, okay, I could have a practice that makes $200,000 per year, and I work 0 days, or you could work 1 day and you could make like $500,000 a year just adding that, high profitability production that's above your break even point. And so that is, maybe where I would think like the best version of this is like 1 to 2 days a week doing the type of dentistry that you actually really enjoy, is energizing to you. And like, and I would question, you should be able to do that for a very long time, quite, happily. And if you're not, then you should probably take a look at why not, because that's like a really good spot. And so I think that that's the thing I really want to open up people's minds to. And this conversation that I had with this dentist, we sort of, we said, okay, I said like, we decided 1 to 2.5 days a week was that like sustainable window. And we said, well, what procedures do you like? And he's like, well, I really like endo. I really like implants. And he really enjoyed like full mouth extractions and dentures. And so those were this dentist's
He's a
like,
man after my heart.
yeah, right. Like that dentist really liked those things. And so we're like, all right, so there was really 2 steps that we had discussed. The first step was, let's make the practice self-managing. And let's think of all of the regular recurring things that are required to run the business. And let's put people responsible for those things. And let's have there be like a 1 hour per week lunch that you just sit there and people like ask you whatever questions are necessary. And then outside of that, you're not running your practice. And then you come in, like let's just say this dentist comes in 1 day a week. They do specialty work in the morning. They have their 1 hour lunch where the office manager is going through all the stuff for the week. And then they go do the afternoon and they leave. And like that, like I encourage everyone listening to this episode who's in that like larger practice to think like, what's the self-managing sustainable version of this that I could run and coast on this really long term? And like that's something that in my opinion you should aspire towards, because the value of owning the asset is so much more valuable if you can own it longer. And you can't own it longer if you don't have that like really cushy schedule, pay, lifestyle combination that makes it feel like you could do this for a really long time.
And then when you own that asset for a long time, you can pick 1 or 2 investment strategies that don't burn you out, that aren't a full-time job, that you can continue to funnel cash into year after year and grow in that way as well. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, but it's just the stretching yourself too thin too quickly, being too
Yeah.
aggressive in moving away from the highest ROI asset that you have. Nothing will net you the return of reinvesting in your practice, in building out systems, hiring the right people, getting coaching. And it's going to take a little while. It's going to take a few years of investing into moves and shifts and sustainability and systems and coaching. Maybe it takes 18 months to have a massive shift in your lifestyle and profitability. But like, what better investment of your time and money than that kind of sprint to getting to where you want to go?
Yeah. So 2 things I want to say. The first thing I want to talk about is the coaching, because, for us, like our coaching is really specific. What we do at its core is we grow practices by growing their hygiene bases, right? So let's just say this practice was like, okay, I set up the sustainable system. I've dialed it in. Like Richard said, this isn't an overnight thing. It takes, like in this particular example with this dentist that we were talking about, probably not going to get to that ideal schedule and lifestyle for like a year. We have like a 6 to 12 month plan for that person on how to do that. So, there is this isn't overnight. This isn't instant gratification. This is hard work and time and iterating. But that being said, let's just say, we're saying, okay, the practice could be worth $3 million today. But if you just retain patients, attract more new patients, grow your hygiene base, continue to add providers at a steady pace that makes sense, then, you can have a practice that's doing $5 million a year by the time 20 years passes, right? So it's like our philosophy and our process, like it grows hygiene pools, and that leads to larger businesses. So it just like owning it longer term and using our philosophy for a long period of time will also make the practice more valuable. Like in the example, I was saying sell it for $3 million and in 20 years sell it for $3 million. But realistically, if you're going to apply our philosophy, you're probably not going to sell it for the same price 20 years from now that you would today. Like it should be worth much more because it should have much more volume.
volume. And if you cash out at today's dollars and you talk
Yeah.
about inflation, like you
Mm-hmm.
want 20 years from now dollars is the payout for your practice.
Yeah, and one thing on inflation, I'm really happy you mentioned that, right? And for people who may have heard me talk about investments or the financial outlook that I have, I always tell people the one thing that I would consider a constant is long-term inflation. It's like that's the thing to bet on. And what better way to bet on that than a business that you own that provides services that you can dictate the fees? Like that is the type of investment that you have that is protected from inflation, is the type that we do with dentistry. And so, that I think dentistry is an excellent hedge against inflation. But, that being said, I want to go back to your other point, which is, okay, how do I invest in a sustainable way? Let's just say okay, George, I'm sold. You've been talking about this for 20 minutes. I'm bought in. What's next? I'm like, okay, well, we've talked about you need to set up the self-managing practice, but the part I really want to talk about now is how to invest money in a sustainable way, right? So you have an income from your practice. You only take what is comfortable to take out, right? So like really only take out the profit and make sure you have enough working capital. Oftentimes people make the mistake, and I've made this mistake, of getting too eager taking money out of the practice account, and then all of a sudden you go below the comfortable amount of money that you need to have like just enough money in the business bank account. And then what ends up happening is then for a few months you don't get to pay yourself because you have to kind of build that back up. And so I would encourage people to have a disciplined process. You have maybe 1 month's expenses in the account at all times, and then you take out maybe a salary, and then at the end of every quarter you take out profit. And I would do this quarterly. I think quarterly is a really good cadence to kind of check in with yourself financially. So like once a quarter, you say, okay, how much money did I make? How much did I spend on my personal life? How much do I have to save for taxes? And then how much is left to invest? And if you do it quarterly and you let investing be, after your lifestyle, your taxes, and obviously there's the advice of like, set up your discount, your DCA, your dollar cost average savings. But in this situation, I think we're just talking about how to make it sustainable. And so I would put a sustainable living expenses, your tax liability, and then after that you say, okay, I have, maybe $25,000 this quarter that has accumulated that it's post living expenses, it's post tax. Now I have this $25,000 that I need to decide what to do with. And then you spend the next quarter, investing that 25,000, but you're always investing, like after you've kind of covered the things that would need those funds so that you can put investments in places that you don't need to draw on them, right? And I think that's ultimately, like, I'm not here to give investing advice, but from, what I really like Warren Buffett's philosophy, which is when you put money in an investment, you really should not have a timeline needing that money to come out. It's something that just stays. And, you can sell it at any given time if it makes sense, but it should not be a necessity. And I think that that type of process would allow you to have that longer term horizon. So, Richard, I said a lot. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that more maybe disciplined approach to, being patient with your investments, to not let tertiary or secondary investments get in the way of creating stress for your primary wealth vehicle, which is the practice.
Yeah, I think the over aggressive distribution and not having enough cash in the business and not having enough personal liquidity.
Yeah.
So 1 month's business expenses, people talk about 3 to 6 months money in the bank. Man, that's a growing figure. Like one of my favorite things to have is a bigger personal buffer
Yeah.
of liquidity that means, guess what? You could sell the practice and take a year off.
Yeah.
Like mentally, like knowing that not doing a dang thing, you could just take a break and then buy another practice and do it again. And that's not even counting the proceeds from selling the practice. There is a mental like sigh of relief when you can do that. But then at the same time, you do what you're doing, which is I have a consistent, sustainable plan of investing everything else. It's not this like I need to decide. And I would really pick a couple lanes. I think people stress themselves out
Totally.
investing
Totally. Totally. Totally.
by trying to like beat the odds, by trying to find the next hot thing, by doing too many things at once. I'm a huge index fund guy. Like I'm that for me is always a default strategy of invest in a global market in a passive index fund. You're not picking stocks, you're not picking mutual funds. You can balance your risk versus stability by bonds versus REITs versus small cap, large cap. There's a bunch of ways that you can intelligently balance your risk via in index funds for your timeline horizon, your risk tolerance. Um, and like for me, that is the first thing to set up, and that's like your core long-term growing vehicle that, like you said, you don't touch. And then sure, you then pick one thing that's either requires a little more strategy or thought, or one thing that requires a little bit more of your involvement. But I also think the investment vehicles people pick and pursue can create a lot of financial stress when
Yes.
they're super liquid, when they go upside down and
Or
you
when they
feel like,
require you to fund it. Like your
yes,
index fund is never going to need, $10,000 on a given month, but your rental property might need a new patio or something, right? And that can create a lot of stress.
it can. The irregular expenses of investment vehicles, as well as, man, how scary is it? I mean, this is, my dad won't mind me sharing this story. He got into some commercial real estate. They got into residential. My mom and dad painted their way through college. They've always painted our houses. They can paint the inside, they can paint the outside. So when you've got like, you don't mind being handy and you kind of like that, you buy some residential stuff, you rent it. Those can be great cash flow things where it's like, here's some stuff I kind of like doing
Yeah.
and I can add value. And it's a local imperfect market where I can come out ahead. And they did that for a number of years. They had good experiences, bad experiences with tenants, but overall it was a great thing. And then they parlayed that into some commercial real estate. And commercial real estate has not done well. Like the JV partnerships they've been in have not panned out. And this sense of like, I've put a bunch of my eggs in this basket and it's high enough risk that the whole thing can kind of go up or down because it's one asset class, because you've really overinvested in that. And then are we going to see this money out of it? There is a there's a real stress of feeling like I did all this work, I invested all this money, this is my nest egg, and now I'm not in control, and it's going in a direction that's really scary. And so I also be very conscious of the potential stress and risk of your investment vehicles, and only invest money in stuff like that you can afford to lose.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, I don't want this to turn into an investing advice, like section, but I think the things that I just want to highlight is you see how knowledgeable Richard is on index funds, right? He talked about index funds as his kind of go-to, and he was very knowledgeable on the different, caps and, all the things he listed there. And I think that highlights maybe what I think is maybe the most important thing is, investing is like, in my world, they use the term capital as a commodity. And it's kind of like there's a race to the same returns across different asset classes, right? So it's like index funds has roughly the same returns as real estate, has roughly the same returns. And there's like minor differences, right? Couple percentage points here and there. But for the most part, you're looking at very similar types of returns. And so, I think that they're all similar to one another. And what makes them different is what you know and like. And so, thinking about what do I like? Because, at the end of the day, if you're going to put money in something, you should probably spend some time on it. And it's like, okay, well, I like spending time on this. So then
Yeah.
you should invest something more adjacent to those things, where you're knowledgeable and you enjoy spending time there, and there's a solid and defensible, reasonable investment to be had. And I think that that's just kind of what I would say. But I want to go back to the initial conversation, which is like you're a dentist. You have, let's just say in this example, you have a practice with multiple doctors. The amount of money that you could make in index funds or, painting houses is not nearly as much as the amount of wealth that can be generated from your primary, like you've spent 10,000 hours becoming a dentist and getting to the point where you have practice management acumen, you've built a business, you've found the practice, you've grown it, you've put your systems in place. Like you're so deep in that process that the highest return on investment is deeper in that process rather than starting from square one or two or three even on something completely new. And I think that for us as dentists, we often get attracted to the idea of making money outside of dentistry. But the thing I really want to impart on you is that whatever practice asset you have in dentistry is the thing you're furthest down the road on and likely going to be your highest return on investment. And so, I think just really trying to remember that, your practice is your primary financial vehicle. It is like imagine, like we talked about the real estate example, right? If you have a $1.8 million practice kicking off cash with two dentists, which is kind of underproducing for two dentists, that's like 80 rental properties, right? Imagine how long it would take somebody to get 80 good rental properties with 80 good tenants, with 80 good property management, 80 good insurance cost structures and everything versus the $1.8 million practice with two associates running on its own. Like,
Yeah.
it's just so much more straightforward for all of us to do what we're primarily good at. And I think that is like, yeah, we talked about investing. We gave you some advice, but I don't want that to be the thing you walk away with. I really want you to walk away with, well, this is great on the side, but I need to recenter myself with what makes me special and unique in the marketplace, which is the fact that you're a dentist, the fact that you have a practice, and like there's barriers to entry for that. So like that's your less competitive, higher return sort of area to really do well. And I think that at times, I think there's this like, you know, optional clinical work, right? People want the clinical work to be optional. And there's two different ways you can do that. One way is you can put yourself in a position where you have enough savings that you don't need the clinical income. And the other way is to put yourself in a position where the practice is spitting off enough cash passively so that you don't need to be a clinician to cover your expenses and, kind of continue on with what you're doing. And I think the much easier road is that second one that I discussed, where the practice is spitting off enough cash to the point where you don't need to go be a clinician day in and day out to cover your expenses and have enough money for taxes and vacations and all of those things. And the sweet spot where I would really encourage most people to get to is that 1 to 2 clinical days per week where you're focusing just on what you like. And that's like the best of both worlds, in my opinion.
And it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse here, but I want to provide a really specific example.
Please.
The limiter oftentimes is us in our experience and our perspective.
Yes.
And I've started this. George knows I don't really talk about it on air too much. The fact that I've started this little men's group that's now my little side business that called Next Level Fathers. One of the funnest parts of it has been the fact that I can invest in coaching, and I don't have to ask anyone. Like I am the business owner. I can I can call the shots, and I've invested in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coaching programs in the last 9 months.
Wow.
Because each time I've grown to a certain point, I've realized I have a very specific bottleneck here. And I don't have the skill, tools, expertise to break through that bottleneck. And I need someone who can do that super well. And it has accelerated my business so fast. And to the point where now we're going to Europe for the next month. And I feel like because I've invested all of this into our business, I can walk away and it's a sustainable thing. And I wouldn't have that freedom if I hadn't reinvested in the business, in coaching in particular, because there was things that I hit hard ceilings of, I don't even know what's possible. I don't know how to fix this problem. And in a dental practice, that ceiling of, I'm pretty good at stuff, this is stressful, I don't know what to do here to make it better. Man, like, why would you not get help? Why would you not reinvest in your practice into coaching right then and there? Because that is, you are the limiter in your business. You have not done what is possible in dentistry before. And your assumptions that, oh, my market's special, or I'm not, I can't XYZ, are assumptions, and they're often dead wrong, and you can't see what you can't see. So I just, especially, man, there's coaching companies out there who like lock people into these like 18-month contracts and charge exorbitant fees in dentistry. And the ROI that we've provided to all of our clients over the past 5 years is insane. And it's really funny to me to see dentists not invest in their own practice. So anyways, rant over.
Well, I think, I want to go back to that, right? Because investing in your own practice, right? And I think Richard talked about it with coaching. I think for us, like, that's just very directly related to one of the reasons why people really enjoy working with us. Like this dentist I was talking about at the beginning, right? His coach is going to be working with him now on making his practice self-managing. So, because he's investing in his coaching, then that coach will be working with this dentist to make their practice self-managing, sustainable, and also continuously growing, right? So it's like a self-managing, continuously growing business that grows because of the processes in place. And like, that's just really valuable. Like, I think that that's a very valuable thing. And I think that, like you said, right, it's the acceleration of growth. And that for us is what we do, right? It's that acceleration of practice growth and the acceleration of systemization and processes in place and ideal SOPs and all of that stuff that's required. And I think, for anyone listening to this, I kind of want to maybe identify a few places where you could be and, just kind of maybe help you see what the next steps might be. So let's just say you're listening to this and you're like, man, I'm a solo dentist and none of this is applicable. So let's just start with that. I was like, okay, well, you're a solo dentist. Great. Well, does any of this speak to you? Maybe some, maybe none, right? But let's just say this speaks to you. Okay. Well, then as a solo dentist, you can begin to envision a version of your practice that you could embody these principles. Maybe you bring on a full-time associate one day and you go part-time doing specialty procedures, right? So this episode maybe helps you see a different endpoint. And then I would argue we could really help you get there, right? But let's just say you're a solo dentist. You're like, well, maybe I have a dentist who's driving my practice day in and day out, a 4-day-a-week dentist who's full-time doing the bread and butter and all the hygiene checks and everything. And I come in 2 days a week and do my favorite stuff, right? I think that gets you in a solo, quote unquote, solo practice to where we're talking about. I think a group practice, the most applicable thing is, well, is my practice big enough? And is it self-managing, right? I think those are the two things that a group practice owner is really probably the gap from where maybe you're listening to this today to where we're talking about, is getting your business to run itself through recurring protocols and processes that are led by your team that keep the business healthy, viable, and sustainable. Like that, the self-managing business is a really important thing. And then, the mega group owner, helping potentially see, I think the mega group owner, from what I've kind of seen, is the one most tempted by the big check because the mega groups tend to go for large figures to DSOs. And hopefully we've helped you see the value of owning that asset longer term. And, I think that for us, like, yeah, I mean, absolutely shared practices. We really eat, sleep, and breathe practice growth. And we also have really positioned the way that we help dentists to be helping their teams. And that's how we help. So I think that we could obviously help a lot. But, I don't really think that's the purpose of the episode. The purpose of the episode is to encourage people to understand that their main practice that they work in and day out is their primary financial vehicle to only create. I like what Richard said with that triangle, right? It creates cash flow on an ongoing basis. It has net worth. And then I forgot, what was the third leg of that triangle?
Freedom.
Yeah, exactly. Right? It's yours. You can do what you want with it. And so, you have your cash flow, you have your net worth, and you have your freedom. And like, if you can really set it up the right way to optimize for what type of cash flow are you looking for, what type of net worth are you wanting, and what does freedom look like to you, then, that's where you can achieve those objectives within your practice.
And, one last point, because I did, overhammer the coaching side, but something we don't have time to talk about today is real quick. It's like, how can you, sometimes people are like, how do I invest in my practice? And you and I did an episode on this, on deploying capital in your dental practice. And there's coaching, there's marketing, there's hires, really good hires that an office manager that is not the like timid, I'm learning and basically like a front desk team member plus, it's like a true office manager. There is facility expanding and growing. There is technology. There's all these ways you can invest in your practice that have different ROIs, but are going to be very specific to your office and what your limiters are and what is needed. And that's where I think it was 2 or 3 episodes ago that you and I recorded this idea that, see, I'm talking about coaching again. Our coaches end up being a delegation of being a CEO and a manager and training your team. Those are the three things that you can't completely delegate those things. But when you're not able to like, my limitations as a CEO, my limitations as a manager, and my limitations training team members and managers, the fact that we do all three of those things, because we're looking at the long-term vision, we're looking at the limiters, we're looking at where capital needs to be deployed, that's CEO hat. That's investing in your practice. And you likely, without a ton of data and expertise on how this is done before, have a hard time deploying capital correctly. That's what you need to do. That's what investing in your practice means. So, anyways, we don't have time to get into that today, but I think either go back to that episode where we talked about that, or maybe we revisit that again in the future.
Yeah, and something else to kind of close on what you were saying is I think that's also what we've really seen as one of the main benefits of the mastermind that we just started. So, a few months ago, we started the Ask George Mastermind, and it's really been my opportunity to kind of tackle some of these higher level subjects with our, clients. They have questions about moving facilities, investing in their practice, and, we can have some of those discussions as well. And so I think, like Richard said, I think at the end of the day, the highest, best return you're going to get is in your practice. And so, consider that as your primary wealth vehicle, make sure you're investing in it properly. And hopefully this episode has been informative and changed your perspective to see maybe a longer horizon or a different path for your practice than maybe you did before we talked.
Beautiful. George, this has been, as always, a delight. I love thinking about these things, and we got off. I'm actually really happy. Anytime we get off topic, we go down a little rabbit hole of like George's philosophy on investing, my philosophy on that. I think listeners love that, and I love it. I enjoy it when we get off topic. So this was great. This made me really happy. And then just the mindset shift of truly doubling down on what's possible for your primary asset. We'll talk to you next time on the Shared Practices podcast.